Okay, so welcome and thank you for being here. And sorry because I'm late, but I was in the other location and I was interviewed, so it took a bit of a while. So we're here for panel number 6 with Lella Cariddi and Anthony Dion Mitzel. So just to give you an idea of the two profiles we have here in front of us, I'm going to read a few notes about their bios. Lella Cariddi holds a grad dip in community development from Caulfield Institute and MA multidisciplinary from University of Tasmania. Cariddi started her professional career by youth working at Co-ASIT and continued to engage with the Italian community throughout Victoria as adult educator and the multidisciplinary curator of ethnography, art, and artifacts. In 2005, she co-curated the International Festival of Poetry in Translation. In 2014, was invited by Multicultural Arts Victoria to create a What Happened at the Pier project, which resulted in 4 multi-ethnical social history publications. In 2019, she managed a reciprocal and exchange between Italo-Australian artists and artists from Italy. And the second speaker we have here today is Dr. Anthony Dion Mitzel, who is an adjunct professor of linguistics, language and culture at the University of Bologna, Italy. Mitzel did his doctoral work at University College London, UK, with a dissertation entitled Ephemerality and Authenticity, the Memes of Cultural Production in Italian Diasporic Culture. His most recent publications are An Unlimited Memeosis of Godfather, diachronic and synchronic observations of a pervasive and ubiquitous meme in Italian-Americans in film, establishing and challenging Italian-American identities too, published by Palgrave Macmillan, and The Humor of Broken English, the Italian dialect poetry of T.A. Daly, in Humor, Translation, Food, and Other Indispensable Things, published by Bloomsbury Academic. Currently, he's writing, directing, and producing the short-form documentary film Our Lady. So I will give the floor first to Ms. Lella Cariddi, who will talk about instrumental social history in Australia and in the US. So please, the floor is yours.
See.
Doesn't work?
Does this sound?
Yeah,
It works. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Stories have legs, and I'm immensely honoured to be here today amongst you. The title of my project, the overarching title, is What Happened at the Pier, which consists of 4 volumes of ethnographic stories by and about immigrants and refugees who, up to the late 1970s, with little or no knowledge of where they were going, boarded ships that departed from the piers of Trieste, Genoa, Napoli and Messina, and after weeks of voyaging across mostly rough seas and are very angry in the ocean, disembarked through the historical entry points of Princess Pier and Station Pier in Port Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. I was born in Italy and arrived in Australia with my family in 1955 with our documents stamped enemy alien. I live in Melbourne, the capital of Victoria, which is the smallest state in the Australian mainland. It is estimated that in 2024 the population of Victoria will be close to 7 million people. Approximately 30% of those were born overseas. In the Italian context, of the 400,000 who at the most recent census claimed Italian ancestry, 65,000 were born in Italy. This figure would have been much, much higher 20 years earlier, but that's the old generation, and the most recent arrival make up that number, I believe. The What Happened at the Pier program endeavoured to be democratic and accessible to immigrants and refugees from all ethnic backgrounds who had settled in Victoria and wanted to share fragments of their own life. The catalyst for researching, documenting and publishing an extensive body of work consisting of previously untold, unheard and unread, poignant and courageous testimonials was a conversation during a Chinese New Year celebration in Melbourne in 2014 between Jill Morgan, who at the time was the CEO of Multicultural Arts Victoria, and me, Lella Cariddi. As you heard, I'm an independent, multidisciplinary curator and community development practitioner. At the time, Jill was planning a program for the 4th edition of the Pier Festival to be showcased at Princess Pier in Port Melbourne, where the migrants who came by ship disembarked, to be presented in late January 2015. Early edition of the Pier Festival were promoted as an essential event to honour and celebrate cultural diversity and to champion social inclusion. They featured ethnic food, music, dancing, and choir singing in national costume. But like in the annals of Australian history, there were no stories about the experience of migration, no story about the transitioning from displacement to settlement, and no stories about the successes and/or tragedies experienced by those who came from the other side of the world and now called Australia home. Between morsels of Asian delicacies, Jill explained to me that during the 2014 Piers Festival, some people emerged from the audience and told her that the festival was an important event to recognise and celebrate the identity of Australians' multicultural communities. And while they enjoyed the entertainment, they had important stories that they wanted to tell. Before the Chinese New Year party was over, Jill invited me to test the ground for various ethnic communities to see if there was wide interest among people of diverse cultural heritage to tell their stories. A week later in Jill's office, while searching for a working title with which to introduce the project to Victoria's culturally diverse communities, we came up with What Happened at the Pier, and it became the project's enduring title, because we want to include participants from as many different cultural backgrounds and from as many different local geographical areas as possible, but there was no funding allocated for this still experimental program. Jill and I decided to set a realistic benchmark. We established that every aspect of the project would be delivered in English, which is Australia's lingua franca. To maintain authenticity, we decided that regardless if the stories were given to us orally or came in written form, they must be in the teller's own voice. To that end, we invite the storytellers to think of themselves as memory keepers and offer them some prompts. For example, we said to them, would you like to think about the circumstance? What were the circumstances that brought you to Australia? Whom did you leave behind? What did you leave behind? Those generalist terms without digging into deep emotional things to start off with. So the emotion emerged through those prompts. Because of the intergenerational nature of the project, the mental or memory keepers sat on the shoulders not only of first-generation migrants, but also their children, grandchildren, nieces, great-grandchildren, 4 times removed, and a close friend. With no funding to cover the cost of production, we need to reach out to Victorian-based community organisations for support. While everyone that we sought support from opened their door and their heart, which enable us to hold community consultation sessions and mount small exhibition on their premises free of charge, some stood out as champions of community connection. Chief among these was COASIT, Museo Italiano, where on the 10th of September 2015, we held the very first and most successful community consultation. The other organisation that unconditionally embraced What Happened at the Pier project was the City of Port Phillip, which is the local government area for the Port of Melbourne, where the migrants disembarked, who gave us a small grant to cover the production costs and gave us access to the Emerald Hill Library and Heritage Centre, which not only became the home for various iterations of the What Happened at the Pier program, but it was also a suitable site to mount a small exhibition, one of which attracted the attention of an Italian journalist who was making content for Ray's Squalor program, and interviewed me about what happened at the PIA project. This led to a most fruitful connection with the Rabovi family in Geneva, whose daughter Isotta eventually moved to Australia, contacted me, and across more than 2 years, she worked as a volunteer in the program and assisted me enormously, and she's here today. This is Isotta, who has direct experience. I always work with young people. I always found them dynamic and generous. So that's an example. Okay, other organisations that generously accommodate the program were the Greek Community Centre in Melbourne, various branches of the City of Melbourne Library, the Mildura Arts Centre in regional Victoria, and various branches of the suburban Yarra Plenty Regional Library. We welcome an offer by an academic from the Centre for the History of Emotion at the University of Melbourne to audio record a batch of oral history from individuals of diverse ethnic background. Other academics based at the Culture and Creative Writing Department, also from the University of Melbourne, were privileged to have, through them, they allocated us final year degree and master students to do their final year placement with the project with us. This had reciprocal benefits. The students gain insight about the challenges migrants face while trying to establish themselves in a new country, and the project gained from the multi-skilled students who worked on various aspects of the project. For example, one designed and assembled Volume 1 of Recalling the Journey, which he uploaded as an e-book on the ISU platform, where everyone in the world can read it for free. A year later, another student edited an entire edition of the print publication titled Recalling the Journey, Volume 2. The media was essential for our work. We needed publicity, we needed media that were open to interviewing participants, for example, and ethnic broadcasters from SBS Radio, the Greek language newspaper Neos Kosmos, ABC Radio is our national broadcaster, like Rai in Italy, ABC Radio Melbourne and the Italian language newspaper Il Globo have all generously supported the program. Essential to the harvesting and documenting of the testimonial was mutual trust and respect for privacy. This was achieved by working side by side with intergenerational individual memory keepers from all walks of life. Up to 2018, we produced 4 volumes of stories, 3 printed and 1 online. Approximately a third of all stories published, 28 of them were by and about Italians who arrived in Australia by ship from every region of Italy's mainland and from Sicily, the Aeolian Islands, Sardinia, Egypt, Argentina and France. We produced 5 short-form documentaries which in 2017 were awarded the Victoria Multicultural Prize, and 1 batch of oral history recordings, amount to 10 mainly small exhibitions of historical ethnographic objects which can be thought of as vessels of memory. An example is the 2016 Sailing into History ethnographic exhibition and associated workshops, which we mounted at Kawasa Museo Italiano. A review of the Sailing into History exhibition by Rita Wilson from Monash University was published in the Italian-American Journal, volume 7.2, the summer of 2017. In 2017, Laura Cionci, an Italian visual artist who was visiting Melbourne, came to see what happened at the PIA exhibition at the Heritage Centre. Laura was inspired by what she saw and suggested a creative collaboration between Italy and Australia. The same day I introduced her to Italo-Australian visual artist Domenico De Clario, and the 2 of them agreed to co-curate an arts exchange project between Australia and Italy titled reciprocal. Under their joint curatorship, Reciprocal brought together 5 Italo-Australian visual artists, Domenico De Clario, Wilma Tabacco, Angela Cavalieri, Eugene da Carcasio, and Damiano Bertoli, who were randomly paired with 5 visual artists from Italy, Laura Cionci, Alessandro Canistra, Luana Perilli, Angelo Bellobono, and Rocco Dubini, who worked collaboratively to create new work. In 2019, reciprocal new contemporary artworks were exhibited in 5 culturally iconic sites in Carlton's Little Italy, which is at the edge of Melbourne's central business district. Coas at Museo Italiano were most generous in allowing us to display newly created reciprocal works and to hold an associate forum and a symposium. Other cultural organisations who landed and sent in support for reciprocal were the Melbourne General Cemetery, where Laura Cionci recited a performance piece around the gravesite titled Grace, and when the cemetery's administration building, Cionci and De Clario exhibited their collaborative artwork. Reading's bookshop, which is considered the best bookshop in Australia, made space for display the new work by Wilma Tabacco and Angelo Bellobono. Immeasurable support also came from La Mama Theatre and Brunetti Cafe, where free public performances were held in each venue. I'm concluding that we really, I'd rather stop here, and if people, there was a PowerPoint, but I don't know how things operate here, so obviously I haven't been able to, I don't know, it was uploaded, so I don't know how to operate. Is there anyone here who can operate the PowerPoint, do you think? No. It's less than 5 minutes.
There you go. One doesn't work. Oh yes, it works. Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Cariddi. We're going to keep the questions at the end for you both. Okay? Is that okay? Now I give the floor to Dr. Mitzel, whose presentation is from DABOT 2, the boat, Semio-memetic vessels as careers of Italian science. I actually think you saw that I gave you 20 minutes because we have time, so okay. I give you 20 minutes as well. And the problem was that here I had a screen, so I didn't know how to show it. I'll show this to you once we have 5 minutes left. Okay.
Yeah, it will be less than 5 minutes for me to run through the PDF. If
you want to show the PDF now?
Well, if possible, yeah.
Okay, so do you agree with that? Or
so how do I do that? I'm not a digital native, so I'm sorry, I need someone to...
I'll help you. I've got the clicker.
Sorry, I need to put it on the screen. Just wait a minute, please. There you go.
This is the paper, is this?
That's the paper. No, it's the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Is it at the end you were talking about?
No, it's a separate PowerPoint.
Okay.
No.
They said that uploaded. Apparently was uploaded last night.
Okay.
No?
No. If we don't have it, we don't have it. No.
I only have this one.
Okay. Well, leave it then. Leave.
That's what they brought to me.
Yeah,
okay.
It's okay. Leave it.
Sorry. Okay, so yes, we can move on.
Do you have it? No, I don't. I was going to say you could send it to me and we could bring it up.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It's all right. Don't worry. Go on.
Oh.
Okay, so...
Are we rolling?
Yes, then we can move on. And,
okay. Ready?
I'm going to start the time.
Okay, well, thanks for coming. I really appreciate being accepted to speak about some observations that I've made. Can we hear, is this okay? Can we hear? I'm fine? Okay. So, as you can see here, when I came up with the title, can we throw up my manual presentation?
Here you go.
Yeah, there we go. So anyway, from the boot to the boat, obviously, Italy's called the boot. There's boats all around. It's a little on the nose, but that's the way. Semio-memetic vessels as carriers of Italian signs. So this presentation, I'm just going to give you some observations that just how I approach diaspora studies, and then if we have time, we'll talk about some of the field work I'm doing. So we'll have some bit about theoretical stuff, and then more praxis stuff to kind of try and prove some of the stuff that I'm talking about. So again, presentation, we study the evolution of Italian diasporic culture through the lens of vessels, both human and material, that carry and transmit cultural signs across time and space. By integrating meme theory, which helps understand the transmission and adaptation of cultural units, the study I'm working on investigates how Italian cultural signs functions as memes, tracing their preservation, adaptation, and loss within diasporic contexts. So some of the questions driving this investigation are: how are cultural signs as memes retained, reinterpreted, and transformed in new environments? What factors influence their adaptation or eventual loss? And through this lens, the study also aims to understand and explain the mechanisms by which cultural continuity and transformation occurs, providing and understanding how diasporic communities, again, balance their past and present within evolving cultural geographies. So while the first part of this presentation will be more theoretical, the second part looks at field work that I've done over the last 2 years in the United States on a small Italian enclave in Northeast Ohio on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. So, oh yeah, sorry. That was the slide that was supposed to be up. Moving forward. So you're probably understanding what's he talking about. So my semio-memetic framework combines semiotics, that is the study of signs and symbols, with memetics, the study of how cultural ideas spread and evolve. So I'm examining how these cultural memes, again, these units of cultural transmissions, like traditions, symbols, and behaviors, are encoded, modified, and transmitted through signs. The study of culture, semio-memetics, helps us understand how cultural identities and practices adapt over time while retaining recognizable markers of points of origin and host countries and cultural influences. I would direct you to Fred Gardefei's Italian Streets and Signs if you want to see where some of the ideas I had from some of this work. So an example, it helps explain how Italian-American traditions arrive and blend Italian roots with American influences, yet remain culturally Italian, and continues to propagate both in the real, our prime world, and the digital or composite world, because we are increasingly communicating in the virtual space. And younger generations are all communicating this histories and past and contemporary times in virtual space now. Hopefully we can get through some of this. So, right. Why do I say the ship of Theseus? Because this always comes to mind. Ship of Theseus is a metaphor, asks whether an object that has all of its components replaced remains the same entity. So in cultural transformation, it illustrates how cultures evolve by adapting elements over time while maintaining their core identity. So we could look at Italian-American culture in the Mahoning Valley, the Allegheny Plateau, the Appalachian Mountains on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. How does it retain its Italianness despite the significant adaptation in foods, foodways, language loss, customs, cultures, traditions? So the metaphor highlights how this continuity and change coexist in the preservation of cultural identity. Vessels serve as fundamental carriers or vectors in the transmission of Italian cultural signs. Okay. Don't pay attention to the dates on that. I was just looking at the Great Migration. It goes from 1880 to 1924. Then it gets stopped by quota laws that are put in 1924, 1929 on the Italians. That kind of ends that Great Migration of Italians historically, the way they were pre-Ventennio, into the United States, into South America. And that is a fundamental break in the people and a lot of cause for dissonance between diasporic groups. So, from a materialistic perspective, seafaring ships are physical objects and have historically transported Italian immigrants. I wrote this because we're here in Genova and the ships are all around. They've transported Italian immigrants along with tangible cultural artifacts, such as their food. Not really, but their foods in their minds, the recipes. And written recipes, ideas in the form of art and religious realia, not to mention tools. So these objects carried material representations of Italian traditions and values. serving as symbols and of identity maintenance and creation in new loci. And due to their decentered nature, they are lightning rods of meaning and can be considered cultural totems. Now, cultural artifacts in the form of wine, olive oil, and religious statuary symbolize Italian culture to the diasporic person, embedding, let's say, the energia di italianità into diasporic enclaves once upon arrival in their destinations. But we also need to continuously reassert the importance of localities and their material realities in contribution to IA hybridity, Italian-American hybridity or American-Italian hybridity. From a humanistic perspective, Italian immigrants themselves act as living vessels, carrying intangible cultural signs like language, both standard and dialects depending on class and educational attainment, culinary methods and traditions, as well as customs. To varying degrees, the immigrants embodied and shared cultural practices, ensuring their survival and evolution in the host country. Even today, the descendants of immigrants continue to act as vessels, balancing at times unbalancing preservation of traditional peninsular and insular Italian identity as opposed to diasporic identity with adaptation to their local context, such as blending Italian and American cultural traits in the United States. By combining these two perspectives, vessels facilitate the dynamic process of cultural transmission, its adaptation, identity formation, and maintenance in the Italian diaspora, as we can say applied to the American context, the North American context. All right, so this is something that I mean, try to bring the sciences in as proper social scientists. In linguistics, they're always trying to be science. They're the most science of the humanistics, so I'm always around linguists. So the idea of superposition is really intriguing to me because going through chat rooms and hearing once an Italian American asks a question, sometimes they are just roasted by peninsular insular Italians and the gatekeeping kicks in and it becomes a very negative space. And then it gets kind of vice versa too. I don't want to go into that right now. I'm not going to do a below the line analysis. But so what's going on here? And I want to get away from that, so try to find something a little bit more anchored in, let's say, physics to figure out why people are having these dual existing realities. So I don't think it would be any surprise that the definition of Italian really depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to people from Italy proper, who are just going about their day, or what we can refer to as Peninsular Insular Italians, they may say that Italians are people born in Italy, speak Italian, okay? I think that's been the classical 19th century, 20th century view of culture and language. And if you dig a bit further, they may concede that children born outside of Italy to Italians are Italians as well, and if they speak Italian. So once you start probing, it changes, right? So again, you'll see the superposition. Again, comes to mind The Third Space by Homi Bhabha. So if you're in North America and the US, you may get another definition from what we can call diasporic Italians now, or Italian Americans, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at North America, South America, there is a group of people that do share common traits. If we get beyond the nationalistic fervor that's always imbibed in this discourse. So those whose ancestors migrated from Italy during the Great Migration, again, the post-World War II, that's the big cutoff right there. Mussolini stops immigration, even stops internal immigration, right? So it's a very prescriptive way of being. Now, but if you talk to a culturologist, they will tell you it depends on the contextual mechanics of time and places and spaces, right? So again, a little bit thinking, if you want to think deeply about this. So now as we increasingly integrate the digital or composite worlds into our real and prime world, so do we find an interesting platform for these conversations, at times fights over who gets to call whom what. And while it's important that we keep talking about it, gatekeeping on who is and who isn't Italian still creates fractures in the discursive place. So in order to get around this issue, I think the concept of superposition is a helpful metaphor. Again, for those of you not familiar with superposition, it's a concept in quantum mechanics where a system can exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured or observed. And this is what the brain does. Cognitive linguistics looks at it. It doesn't crystallize until we audibly put information out there. So, for example, an electron, let's say a person, can be in different energy levels at the same time, only collapsing into one state upon observation. Of crucial importance is the context of diasporic culture. Who's observing who, what is the context, and where is the observation or measurement taking place? You are who you are, you who are, I think you are, you who are, this room thinks you are as well. So it's already built into how we represent identity. And since the theme of this is questioning identity, I think this is a very interesting way and metaphor to look at it. So when applied metaphorically to the dual identities in Italian America, I believe the superposition captures the complex coexistence of cultural identities. Italian Americans often navigate between their Italian heritage and American societal norms, which manifest elements in both cultures simultaneously. Like superposition in AIIA doesn't fully collapse into being only one Italian or American, but instead exists dynamically as a blend of both, oscillating between two polarities. So this duality can manifest in traditions, language, and values. There's our proof, which I would like to show you coming up here with the praxis part of this. And they might simultaneously celebrate old world customs. Keep that in mind, old world customs, while adapting to new world realities and modulating how they navigate a particular space and place. This constant negotiation and renegotiation of these overlapping cultural states reflects the totality of superposition in cultural identity. Now, okay, so give me 1 second, because I need to cut a little bit since this. Okay, I think we're pretty clear on that. Moving forward, one thing that's also influenced me in my studies, not only on culture in linguistics, but also in humor studies, is center versus periphery theory. So in the context of Italian-American diasporic traditions, like that of the Lowville Mount Carmel Festival, the concepts of core and periphery illuminate the relationships between Italy as a cultural center and its diasporic communities as peripheral extensions. Applying Harold Innis's theories of communication, Harold Innis was a contemporary of Marshall McLuhan. Innis is an interesting person because he came from a crop of Canadian academics, were the first that were trained in Canada to work in Canadian universities, breaking the hegemony of the United States, fooling professors up in Canada. They looked at things from a Canadian perspective, so I found that to be very interesting. Personal note. So, again, the core culture represents Italy's geographical and historical nucleus of tradition. Keep in mind that, superposition, where practices like religious festivals originated. In contrast, the diaspora acts as the periphery, where these traditions are reinterpreted to new cultural and societal landscapes, as I've said. Now, think of that as almost like replanting things, right? I call it cultural terroir. Any of you have worked with wine. You can take a root from one place, but the land will impart a sort of flavor into the wine based off of soil composition, air, water, light, pitch of the sun, et cetera, et cetera. I think it works the same thing for people on a metaphorical level, because I'm not essentialist, and I don't mean to make it seem like it's essentialism at play. So the diaspora acts as a periphery where these traditions are reinterpreted to suit new cultural and social landscapes. The dynamic allows for the preservation of core religious, again, lay symbolism, such as we will look at the baby doll dance, or the pupazza, while enabling adaptations that reflect the realities of the lived contemporary Italian-American experience. Again, it's simultaneously rooted in a core that reshapes the periphery. Italian-American festivals blend old world religious rituals with new world aesthetics, such as pyrotechnic spectacles and both adapted and modified traditional music. This hybridity resists homogenization due to community involvement and the continual effort to keep their traditions alive. We have to realize that after the industrial period essentially ended in 1977, Italian immigrants no longer came into the Midwestern parts of the United States because the jobs weren't there. What that does is it cut off historic Italian enclaves because new people were no longer coming in and marrying and bringing in updated information. So, how are we doing? Okay, perfect. Again, so why don't I just show you, I'll tell you what, instead of me talking, I'll just show you what I'm talking about here. Those are some memes if you want to, those are what the kids are using today. So these are just some, this is the Mount Carmel Festival. This is the geographical location we're talking about here. Now, some people were talking earlier about the big cities in the United States that have the more traditional Campania, Sicily. In western Pennsylvania, northeast Ohio, it's mainly Abruzzese, okay? And Calabrese. And there are people from Campania, but generally speaking, it's more central Italy, okay? At least that's how the people that identify themselves, and that's the histories that they know. And there is a connection to that. I'm not just saying that. We have found proof. This is the baby doll. So the Lowville Mount Carmel Festival is a 130-year-old tradition. Okay. On the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. The local tradition celebrates Italian-American heritage, Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. While these events are equally important to the festival, one event stands out over the others as a major draw to the public each night. This is the baby doll dance. It's a semi-pyrotechnic display in which a large doll figure outfitted with fireworks is danced. Now, earlier in the week, they take the Madonna del Carmine out of the festival house, their cultural center. It only comes out one time to walk around the village. And they walk it around the village, they go to mass, and they bring it back in. The baby doll. So what we see at play here, if we want to break it into anthropological fame, we are still seeing the sacred and profane. And so when you see the baby doll, you know, I'm sure you'll have some inferences that you want to make. So the baby doll is 20-foot effigy, a female figure made from wood, bamboo, paper mache, and painted with the colors of Italy's flag. Not always the Italian flag. This is something that's probably about 30 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. This iteration of it's from the 1950s, but it was really created the first time in the 1930s. Interestingly, the song played at the Mount Carmel Festival Italian Band is an amalgamation of 4 phases of the classical Italian military marches. According to Johnson, this is the Bersaglieri. So if you know the phases of the Bersaglieri, you will hear it. Again, this is a very big draw. And while this is an Italian-American thing, it's not only based in their ethnicity. Everyone from the whole valley and the whole city and the whole environs of the area come to this. So the population is about 2,500, 3,000, swells about 50, 60,000 some years. All right. Manuel, let's just show that baby doll real quick, and then I can show you the connection to Abruzzo.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 128th Mount Carmel.
So the question then becomes, as if this is a meme, are they keeping it going, or is this keeping it going? Okay, if I can just, we'll finish on one thing, because this is going on in Northeast Ohio, Youngstown. Let's just go right over to the other side. Now, in my going next. So again, just looking at these as memes, not the things we're sharing, but in the expanded cultural sense, and how they've moved from the peninsula. And it's very interesting because once people move from centers, they go to peripheries and they create new centers of their culture that they start to draw off of. So that's where we're at right now. I thank you for your time and appreciate it. And have a good night. This will be online if you want to look it up. You can go on Instagram, Our Lady Documentary.
Yes,
Thank
we can
you.
open questions.
I've got a big voice.
Okay, you
I
need
have a
this.
question for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Anthony, I noticed that I think both, but at least one of the baby dolls, it was a young man who was inside the doll. Is there any significance to that?
You mean, we looking at it from a gender frame?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
I mean, this is so old. Well, let's put it this way. This is so old that a woman's not going to get up in an effigy of a woman to be burned. That's cutting it a little too close.
Okay.
Frank Speziale, his father was the one who did this. And he's just retired from doing this, and his nephew is now doing this. So the baby doll, they make $4,000 a week to do this for the festival. It's the largest expenditure that the festival puts out every year. It's kept in a garage. We're trying to get this in the Historical Society so it doesn't get burned up in the garage. Like Mount Carmel Band lost its sheet music because people just keep it in their houses. So I can't stress this. If you have important artifacts, give them to a museum because stuff gets lost. But to answer your question, I don't know, I don't think they'd want to do that, but it's always been a guy. This originally started in the Mahoning Valley as a way to make money, to do the baby doll. And it wasn't at Italian festivals. It was used by an Italian fellow from Abruzzo that would go to local community festivals, which is essentially a very agricultural area in Northeast Ohio. You know, and it's the last regions in the Appalachian Register. So you have this kind of mix of hill culture and agriculture. So it was a money-making thing. But it still is connected to the traditions in Abruzzo as entertainment. Now, we can do a deeper analysis, but I don't want to get into that right now, of what it actually means. If you've noticed, she has gotten bustier over the years. I mean, this is a fertility doll. I mean, this is, one of the oldest in human civilization. After we started setting bones and sitting with people and burying them, then we started having things to make you have another child, because it must have been magic to grow and produce something, right? So that's the way I'm looking at it right now. So I don't know. I don't think women would want to do it. But I have to tell you this, in Lowville, though, the gender roles are still pretty pronounced, too.
It's interesting to see the costume come off and see a young man come out of it. I mean, I can't help but notice.
Yeah. What's heavy? Not saying women can't do it,
I know, I'm just saying.
but this is a family business, too.
Yeah, it begs questions. It makes me ask more questions. So thank you for
Good,
the
yeah.
answer.
Send them.
Please.
It's got nothing to do with witchcraft, because it is prior to women in those days. It seems like it's quite a...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's the sacred and profane. On the 14th, they bring out the Madonna, and then they burn this 4 nights a week.
It's a negative connotation.
I don't know if it's a negative connotation. This is just burning off the past, There is, depending on how far back we want to go. I'm just relating from what the community tells me. And women are a big supporter of this. And
How do they read it? How do the women read it? I mean, do they?
it's part of their culture. It is part of their culture.
Something that they did in Abruzzo and
Yeah.
we still do it and so.
Honestly, I meant that, this is their cultural center for Italian culture. Usually I start this presentation out is that when I think about Italy, I'm actually thinking of Youngstown, because we know culture by when we're first exposed to it. And west of Appalachia, one of the largest percentage of Italian descents is in the Mahoning Valley, statistically. So there's a lot of culture there. They've lost the language, but the signs, this is what I've learned from Fred, always still remain, but you have to look for them. And so again, the women like it. They have their body modification, they get tattoos. A friend of mine, who's a full professor of psychology, has the first bar of the Baby Doll dance. She was the first woman in the Oakville Mount Carmel band. They didn't want women in. She was the first one as a young woman. She's also gay. So this is a very traditional area, but they also put aside a lot of these culture war bullshit points because there's still a community. And this is also a community that was hit disproportionately by the closing of the steel industry, because that's how all the Abruzzesi got there to work in the steel. I mean, I'm here doing this because I would have been a third generation steel worker. But the mill closed, so I had to go to college. It's either that or go to war. I think I did the right thing. So by the closing of the mills, you have this little enclave that is still working class. But it's a different kind of working class. It's not the working class we hear about all the time now with the election, et cetera, et cetera. It is a working class that still retains its traditions, but still has a very open-minded. They traditionally vote Democrat still there. So in the valley, on the Mahoney River that feeds into the Beaver River, that feeds into Monongahela, that feeds into the Ohio River, that stuff just kind of flows over top of them. So they are still strongly American, but very Italian as well. And that's why superposition comes in, because who are you speaking to, right? And it was said earlier, it's where you're at. Did that answer the question? I don't know if that answered your question or...
I was just going to ask, a lot of these traditions can end up being like a time capsule.
Yeah.
Because in the place that they've come from, they've moved on, and they may not be using it. So do they use that still here in Abruzzo, the same sort of style of tradition?
So like the meme, it's modified and it's adapted to its environment. That's why I showed you both pictures. One, if you reduce it down to its sign component, you have the effigy. How it manifests in the geographical location of is important. So they reuse it in the United States, right? Rather than burning it up every year. Okay? So yes, it holds on to a lot of value, right? We know, why is the Bible more valuable, regardless of what anybody feels about religion? Why are religious texts more valuable than stuff that we put in blogs? Time. Time imbues value into objects, and so they just have more value. The ones in Abruzzo are definitely a more visceral experience because they tend to burn them. Now, on the coast, they reuse some, but they tend to make them with paper mache and burn them more. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. I would like to continue to go. I think what I'll really have to do is going to have to go to Spain next to see that influence on Iberian culture when, in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, when it was going back and forth. That would be the next passage to go in to see rituals.
So in Sardinia,
Yes.
a very similar tradition.
Yeah.
About that during Carnival.
It's a pupazza.
They burn it.
Yeah.
And they throw it in the local river.
Yeah.
But it's really,
But to your point, not very nice. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Well,
Excuse me. Yeah.
Lella, I have a question for you in terms of what types of history accumulate as you develop community? In other words, when I was a kid, we didn't have the stories that people told over and over again became the history. And then all of a sudden some professor came in and said, we're going to do oral histories. And the people began to talk, but very few people, because telling a story in a dinner or a saloon, you can be very intimate, but when you are put in front of a video or audio recording, all of a sudden, the idea of who this history is going to. So I wonder how the evolution of history has, worked in your sense of developing the community.
I've said earlier that we work very closely one-to-one, and I suppose in a certain way you need to think of a confessional that people in the privacy of their own home, they opened up and they revealed a wide range of experiences, both by themselves, by their ancestors, by their extended family members. However, they also pointed out, I'm telling you this, but it's not going to be published in the story. And I would say, why is this? For example, in Australia, while it's not officially recorded, I know from personal engagement with a variety of people from all other, who originate from all other parts of Italy, that men tended to fall in love with non-Italian women. She's pregnant, and the man returns to Italy. We have a prime minister who was born like this. We have a prime minister who is a bastard of an Italian father who went back to Bari, for example. And this story is just one of the many that kept repeating itself. And I'd say, well, this is what happened. And I'm saying, why don't you want it included in your family stories? Oh, no. The man went back to Italy. He married an Italian woman. He returned to Australia. They have children. They will be embarrassed. So there's a lot of protection in terms of what is allowable and what is not allowable to share with the wider population. And so because we were committed that it'd be their own words, they would be the censors, you know, that's what happens. So the most important, I suppose, aspect of anthropological aspect of this population often go unwritten, unheard, and, you know, and get lost because of protection for family honour, family vergogna, you know, all those sort of things. Yeah.
But I wonder also if you could comment on the role that language plays in capturing and transmitting this history, because if, for example, there are many people today whose names are Rotolo or Esposito, and they don't know that means they're bastards.
No, no,
You know,
no,
they
that's
don't know
true.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
But the people who speak Italian know that. But since, you know, I don't know if Italian was lost as quickly in Australia as it was in the United States.
Oh, it depends. It depends which part of Australia you live in. In rural centres, for example, you've been to Mildura.
Right.
Mildura is a big regional agricultural centre in the northwest of the state, and you'll find there that there's groups of families, all with the same surnames, all who have kept a tradition, both culinary tradition, family tradition.
Oh, absolutely. I just spent 3 weeks there.
You know, so, and the dialects as well. Right. The dialects are so alive, you know, in regional Victoria, like Mildura where you went, a little bit further south, an area still in the Wimmera called Swan Hill, where I lived as well. Yeah, in the city, things progress differently than they do in rural and remote area. Yeah, traditional, both in terms of religious observation, but also in terms of food preparation, all that sort of thing. It varies. It varies from between the city and the rural area. And so we find that in the country, if you like, things are more incestuous, you know, in terms of marriage, in all sorts of areas.
I was involved as a taste tester in family chili wars. who from Calabria made the best chili?
Absolutely.
And I must have had 15 chilies in one setting, because I really love, and I could take a lot. And they thought I would be the perfect, person. No, try this. No, hers are no good. You have to try these. But exactly what you said.
Yes.
And I did find that the difference of the language, because especially in the United States, the history and the story, and especially the embarrassing things that happen to people and they process them in Italian, they can't pass them on to somebody who doesn't speak Italian.
That's
so
true.
those stories never get told unless.
Yep.
And then I found when I interviewed old people in nursing homes, I would start off interviewing them in English, and then we would start speaking Italian. And then the people who worked there used to yell at me because the people would still speak Italian when I left. So, but once they got into speaking Italian, they all of a sudden they told a completely different story.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think the older we get, the more we return to our thoughts, and then the Italian comes back as something that is very, very prominent and very important to us, almost subconsciously. But when it comes to Melbourne, when the first generations were from Greece, right, in the 50s, and then came the Italian wave. And that's when they were sort of beaten out of them to speak Italian, which was, they were wogs, they were seen as something, secondary citizens. Same thing happened, obviously, with the Maori people in New Zealand, sort of the story. But that would take a long time to recover from that trauma as a people, as a ethnic group, or a cultural group.
And it was also the fact that, certainly in Australia, the stereotype, especially of the Southern attack, was totally negative.
Yeah.
And therefore, the younger people especially, they wanted to fit in, and they became, as early as possible, new Australians and Australians. And that's why I think the official history isn't real. Quite frankly. And that's why even social history is not the real truth, because people remember what they want to remember and neglect what was traumatic to them. Because I've actually interviewed people and in terms of, have you experienced racism in the 1950s and the 1960s when you were living in Melbourne? And the answer is, oh no, look, things were really good. Now, but I knew about it, so I said, well, what about when you were in the hotel? In Australia, they're called pubs. And so they go in and they have a drink of beer. And, you told X many years ago that you got in a fight because someone called you a dago. And they said, oh, yeah, but that doesn't matter because that happened many years ago. And that's a problem. That's the real, in my view, that's a problem with history. And that's also the problem with identity, especially in the Australian context.
Was a question.
Yeah, and
I was going to jump in at what you were saying about interviewing people, and then the secrets come out, but they're not to be printed, not to be the drum of fiction. But I'm going to put forth fiction as the way that those things can emerge, right? Because they cannot emerge in the nonfiction or in the ethnography, really. But the problem that you have is who's going to write fiction that's going to get closer to the truth, right? Who's going to do that? It's not the people who you're interviewing, because they may not be writers, they may not be interested in writing fiction, but is there a way to collect those stories on, these are anonymous, your name will never be on them, but can we use them to better understand in our fiction what the reality was? Because we're never going to get the reality in our nonfiction.
yeah, well, there is a network of Italian women writers called Ascolta Women, and we're endeavouring to do that through various themes, and some choose to write as fiction and some choose to write as memoir. So it's a slow process, but we're about to publish our first and fourth anthology next March. So, and also Australia has produced a number of high-profile authors. One of them now lives in the UK, Elise Valmorbida, and she won the Victorian Premier Literary Award with a novel set in Italy, for example, which reflects a wide range of women experiences. Another one is Anna Maria Dell'Oso, who is a journalist, and she's originally, her ethnicity is Abruzzese, and she's written for mainstream major newspapers, a column major newspapers for a number of years, and now she's also producing fiction and non-fiction. So from disparate sort of sides, if you like, a body is emerging, a body of literature. Lots of people have written their memoir, lots of individuals have written their memoir or a short story. So there isn't one single body of work, if you like, but there's a widespread branches that contributes to that Italian ethnicity, Italian culture, Italian history, through the theatre, through cinema, through printers, printed short form, long form. Yeah, there's a variety. I mean, look, there's a PhD there for someone just to research what's been written by, and a lot of the earlier Italian migrants also were self-published. I know two gentlemen.
This is part of my PhD.
Yeah,
self-published.
Two gentlemen who they were semi-literate, to be honest, and some of it is in dialect. One is Calabrese, one is Abruzzese, and they both published, tomes of poems about their experiences. There's a wide range, both in poetic form, in narrative, long form narrative, short form narrative. Yeah, it's not together. It's not, but eventually I think it will come together. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we have the Italian Film School every year, Lavazza International, the Italian Film School.
Sorry, I can't hear very well.
Lavazza, I think it used to be called the Italian Film Festival. So the narrative can also be in a screen version, filmic text. And it goes away from what you're asking, really the same thing. But I was interviewing for Segmento, I wrote for them for many years. There's an Italian magazine for the Italian community in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And I interviewed Mimo Calopesti,
Yeah.
who did a film about Aspromont, Land of the Forgotten. So there you know.
Yeah. Giorgio Mangiamele was the first filmmaker of the Australian cinema renaissance, the late Giorgio Mangiamele. Another one is a playwright, an award-winning playwright, a screenwriter and playwright. So there's a wide range of creative people, very dynamic creative people, that we operate independently and individually, and contribute to the maintenance of identity, culture, and developing and changing. Identity is not static; it's a shift in identity. How we express it through the cinema, through the theatre. In different forms. Kawasa just held a festival of performances by young Italian playwrights. How many? 5 of them, Elizabeth? Yeah, I think 5 young Italian playwrights of contemporary expression. So there are different approaches to maintain our identity, our cultural identity, in a kind of changing, in a dynamic, not a static, but in a dynamic, rather than following traditions. In Swan Hill, in Mildura, they follow the Madonna. They would have things like that, the procession and the Madonna and all that. Whereas in the cities,
Yeah.
different things happen.
And that tracks too, because for instance, the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, for those of you who aren't familiar with, is a high plateau of the mountain. So it descends and then it hits the agricultural areas. So about at Akron, where the tires are from, Goodyear, it gets real flat at that point, but up until that, so it's highly industrial. If you want to speak Italian, you have to go to Western Pennsylvania and speak to the historic immigrants there. So many still from Abruzzo, some younger, post-1950s, and you can still speak the dialects. There's still Sabino and stuff like that. Still, but a lot of people from Pacentrano, Pacentro, so they have to Pacentrani. And that's where you can still speak Italian. But once you get over into the border in Ohio, it becomes much more suburban, and it's gone. It's gone. I mean, it's a class thing issue, you know. The more affluent people become, the less they are
education.
Yeah, exactly. And well, and then what? But I think it works the big thing, because when the mills closed, a lot of people lost their role there in the capitalist order, and so it's been well documented by John Russo and Sherry Lincoln. You know, people started going to churches back. They went back to their churches because they needed food. They needed community, needed places to talk. Even the Catholic Church in Youngstown thought about trying to buy the steel mill to keep it going, which was ludicrous, but they had no idea what to do. And we're talking about in the period of 6 years, $6.5 billion leave one geographical area. So it just becomes a wasteland.
Yeah.
But the small enclaves where they were still doing stuff, where they still had family and community, did not suffer as much as the other ones.
Sorry, to pick up an earlier question, one element of history which is really lacking, which is urgently need to be attended to, is the question of how Italians were treated during the Second World War. For example, my husband's family, who were in the country not far from Mildura, they had their radio license taken off. They had to hand in their guns. If they had to see a doctor outside of the town, they had to get permission from the sergeant. There were all these limitations and restrictions, and that's because they were on the land 6 miles from the town. People in the town, throughout Australia, they got raided and sent into concentration camps at the other end of the country. Throughout the duration of the war, they had business, they lost business, they had farms. So that part is still largely unrecorded, undocumented, untold. So there's enormous history. Yeah, Elizabeth, you know about it? Yeah.
I was going to say, Lella, this year, in April, they had an international conference about Italian internees all around the world, and it was actually the conference was set in New York. And so various groups, independent people as well as institutions who are collecting information, were able to start talking about this and sharing it, because you're right, it's still a hidden story that is difficult to tell because people were silenced a lot of the time as well, but they're starting to bring it out and giving people confidence to talk.
There's a book by a woman called Spitzka in Australia who wrote about the internment of people. And there were two. One is a narrative, and the other was actually a book of stories by people who survived, or their descendants of people who survived the internments, which I think is interesting. It still doesn't tell the whole story, and obviously in the official histories that we're taught in school, it's not mentioned at all.
Yeah, and some people, I raise it with some people from the country, and I start asking questions. What about this? Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Oh, there was nothing. So there's a denial. There's a denial on the part of, say, the Australian-born generation that these things have happened, that they have taken place. It's a kind of wanting to protect what they don't really have in terms of, you know, identity and
again, peripheries create new centers, and then that becomes the reality that you don't want to lose.
It wasn't just the internment. There are stories. There was a solicitor by the name of Valadami who was born in Australia, so his father would have gone to Australia probably in the early 1900s, and his father ran a lawyer's office. And
Sorry, who was this?
Validami, he was a solicitor. He died last year. But a group of people raided his office and burnt his books because he was Italian during the war. And as Val would say it, the police wouldn't do anything, even though they reported it. They just said, well, what do you expect? You're lucky they didn't assault you.
That's true.
But the important thing is that, as Val said, it wasn't the only incident. There's a history of violence against Italian immigrants in Australia, which is totally unrecorded as well. So there's the internment, and there's also the violence. And the other thing which is also told is that when they did intern a lot of the Italians who were working on farms during the war, they found that there weren't enough people to actually produce vegetables, and so they would release them to go out and work.
If your farm was 6 miles from the town, you were exempt.
Yeah.
So that was the thing. So there's an enormous amount of work that needs attention there.
Especially that intersects with the DIY stuff too.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention one thing. I think Italian's a great language because, as opposed to English, you have the concept of storia in Italian, and I always start out my civilization courses where storia is contextual, whereas in English we have history and story. But Italian mixes the two, and it's much more an authentic representation of how we actually process information in our lives and the world process it. So it's much more to the point, you know? Yeah. Maybe, Tanya, maybe you thought of that when you were talking about stories.
It was for me the easiest moderation I
Oh.
read. Was just
Well done.
Thank you.
So this is the PDF stuff you had?
These
were your visuals.
Look, I'll send it to you. Do you have an email? Give me your email
Okay.
card and I'll send some of these things.
I'm gonna write it